大家好，我是 James 王俊英，欢迎来到 Talk with James，说说英语，聊聊生活频道。反思自己学习语言的经历，我总结了学习语言的理念和成功经验。今天要把这些想法和观点给大家分享，希望能够对各位朋友有帮助。以下的内容以英语为主。Let's get started. I want to begin with a question. How do you know when you've learned something? How do you know if that knowledge fully belongs to you? Very recently, I was revisiting my studies of Canadian history because that's where my family is from. That's where I grew up. And although I was raised in the Canadian school system, I realized that I remember almost nothing about what I studied back in elementary school and high school. And by the way, in high school, I was a straight A student. And yet, there's a whole section in my brain, the knowledge of Canadian history, that seems to be non existent. So did I really learn Canadian history back in school, even though I did well on those assignments and exams? In the West, Asian people, Chinese people have a reputation for doing very well in school, doing very well in tests, exams. But I wonder how many of us even remember what we learned in high school. So, for example, if you are from China, how many of you, a few years after you graduated from high school, or even now, now that you're an adult, perhaps a working professional now, that you remember anything from what you studied for the Gaokao, or equivalent if you're from Taiwan or from Hong Kong? I suspect many of you share my experience. You just can't remember. And I also guess that many of you who learned English as a second language did pretty well in school for passing the English tests, such as the TOEFL. But after you immigrated to the West, the real test begins, the test of real life, interacting with people in the society, working here, living here. And when it came to that, you realize you were not as high level in English as you thought. My vision of language learning comes from my broader vision towards learning in general. And in English, we often use this big word to describe the philosophy of learning and teaching with the word pedagogy. Pedagogy. My learning vision is to see that learning is deep and wide. My pedagogy is a deep and wide pedagogy. This broadens your motivation and goal in how far you want to take learning and in all the areas that you want to take your learning, and it will shape your studies, in this case of English, for the rest of your life. So let me explain what I mean by deep and wide learning. I want to start by explaining what deep learning is. What I described from my high school experience can be called superficial learning. It does achieve a few things, though, like obtaining knowledge, at least for the time, memorizing it, completing the assignment, completing the exam, and getting the degree. But deep learning means that the knowledge impacts you holistically. This learning transforms your thinking, what you know, and second, your perspective, your worldview. I differentiate between knowledge and perspective in this way. Knowledge is the information you can recall and you can talk about. Perspective is the way in which you perceive the world. It is your underlying value system, your fundamental convictions. What's important to you? What do you notice in the world? What do you notice when you're reading? So, to use an analogy, knowledge is like the things that you see. So, for example, there's a table in front of me. There is a guitar over here, this side, over here. There is a book over here. This is Lu Xun, the 狂人日记. Okay, it's knowledge is reading about what Lu Xun wrote about in his essays. But perspective is like glasses. It's like wearing glasses or contact lenses. Sometimes you forget you have them on. It shapes the way you interpret the world. It helps you select information as to what's important to you. And deep learning changes both what you think, what you know consciously, and how you think. Deep learning also impacts you on an emotional level. So, by emotion, I mean, of course, all the emotions like feeling happy or sad, angry or excited. But what I mean by that, additionally, is the deeper emotions that come from your conviction or what is important to you, such as when you feel anxious, when you are thinking about possible failure, okay, for example, in school or in your career, or happiness when you can see success, or when you see success in your children. These deeper emotions based on your goals, your values, your principles. Deep learning also impacts what I call the heart. The heart. Your heart is the deepest part of who you are. Your deepest motivation in life. Your heart is the part of you that determines what you live for, what gives your life meaning, why you work every day. I don't just mean to earn a paycheck, to earn a money, but perhaps some of you think, no, you want to earn money so that your family can be successful. You want to give your family a good life. See, that is your heart, where your heart is at. What do you want for your future, the future of your kids, and things like that? The deepest motivations of who you are is what I call the heart. And also, because deep learning impacts the whole of who you are, it allows for actually greater retention of knowledge. Remember how I mentioned earlier, I could barely remember what I learned from Canadian history back in high school, right? That is not good retention. I didn't retain that knowledge. But if you have deep learning, you will retain the knowledge. And I want to give a couple of examples. One example is actually comes from what my mom used to say to me when I was younger. And I would come home and I had a bad experience because a teacher or a sports coach criticized me, and I felt unhappy because they said I wasn't doing right on this or this or this, or I need to change on this, or maybe it was just a criticism. It wasn't even meant to help me, but they just didn't like me. And I told my mom that experience, and my mom would say in Cantonese, "你知唔知嗰個人係塞錢落你個袋?" In other words, it just means that person is putting money in your pocket, the literal meaning from Cantonese. And to this day, almost like I'm sharing with you now, years later, I mean, she told me this when I was a little boy. To this day, I still remember my mother saying that to me. And to this day, when people criticize me, sometimes they criticize me because they want to hurt me even. Um, I am able to be more patient. I'm able to step back, pause, and think, okay, is there truth in this criticism? Is there an area in my life that I do need to change? And I actually try my best to change. Instead of just feeling sad, I remember the advice my mother gave me and I try to apply it. I remember it to this day. So that is deep learning. Here's another example. And this one relates to language learning. When I was learning French in Quebec, this is the Eastern Canada, I will never forget. There's a verb form in French called the subjunctive form. Subjunctive form, and I don't need to explain what that is. But the point of the story I want to share is I was working as an exchange student in a daycare, all in French. Everything was in French. It was in Montreal, and I was trying to ask my coworker, if do you I asked her, "Do you want me to go to the other room to go see how the children are? Do you want me to go to the other room?" I wanted to ask her that. But because I did not use that form, that subjunctive form, what it sounded like was, and she explained this, my coworker explained to me later on, it sounded like I was asking her, "Do you want me romantically?" 你要得到我吗？这样子比较暧昧，这样子这些对白。So in other words, if I didn't use the right form, I said something completely different. And my coworker was really kind. She corrected me. She explained it to me, and now that I'm able to explain to you now, this was back in high school in grade 11. Okay, this is when I was 16 years old. I still remember that, and I will never forget the subjunctive form. That experience impacted me deeply, and to this day, I remember that verb form in French. Here's another thing about deep learning. It enables adaptability in different settings. Deep learning in English means that not only would you be able to pass your exams in French for in English, French, French is for me, English is for you. In English, for example, but to and you're able to qualify for immigration here. You're able to come to an American school here for university, find a job here in United States or Canada, and so on. But it should expand beyond those immediate goals. It means that you can adapt to having conversations in different settings, in a casual setting. It means that when you're reading road signs, you're driving here, you can understand all the road signs. It means that when you can understand the English newspaper. It means that you can interact with the servers at a restaurant using English. You can do small talk with the restaurant servers. You can read documents that are from your school or from your workplace that's not directly within your professional training. So adaptability in various settings. Deep learning for English also means that you yourself have changed. And I want to just unpack, I said this a little bit earlier on, but I want to unpack this in terms of not only because earlier I mentioned it changes both what you know in terms of the contents, the knowledge, and also how you know. But I want to elaborate a little bit on how deep learning for English, learning English means that you actually think in English. Think in English. So what's the opposite? The opposite, if you don't think in English and you're trying to learn English as a second language or a third language, is that you are translating in your head between Mandarin to English, English to Mandarin all the time. Okay, so when you listen to an English speaker, you're thinking, ah, 什么意思？中文是什么意思？怎么翻译呢? Like you're thinking this in you're thinking about what their meaning is in Chinese. And conversely, when you're trying to speak English, you're trying to say, "Okay, 我要跟他说这个,然后 okay, 英文怎么说呢?" Okay, so you're translating, and the problem with this is number one, it's way too slow, as many of you have experienced. When you're actually in a social setting, you can't catch up with what everyone is saying because it sounded like people are speaking too fast, but honestly, once you have been here for a long time, you kind of you can catch up with the speed of the English, but really because you are translating, it's not that they are speaking too fast only, it's that you are understanding too slow. And so it's too slow. And it makes you less effective, even in your school or in your work setting. But also, if you think in Chinese and translate rather than think in English, it's bound for misunderstanding. And so you must understand what the other person is saying. So, for example, I'll give you an example that I notice many times actually with Mandarin speakers. Let's say you are chatting casually with one of your Western friends, and they're asking you. Let's say you watched Avatar 2 recently, okay, and you're telling them about it, and then they ask you, "Oh, you just watched Avatar? How did you find it? How did you find it?" Now, I noticed many Chinese speakers they did it. They seem to be doing a translation in their head, and they start thinking, "Oh, okay." 他问我的是我怎么找到这部电影。So then your answer, 你的回答就是, "Oh, I found it at the movie theater," or "I found it on a website," or you might say, "My friend told me about it." But what they're actually asking you is not 你怎么找到这部电影，就是 how do you feel about the movie?你对这部电影有什么的感触，什么的感想? Okay, so when you translate the literal meaning, it's bound for misunderstanding. One of the YouTube channels I often watch to learn Mandarin, because you're learning English, I'm trying to learn Chinese. One of the YouTube channels I watch is a channel called Short Chinese, and the speaker in that video explains that when you're learning a language, and she's teaching Chinese, you need to get the feeling of the word. You need to feel the word. So I think she's absolutely right. And I want to repeat what she said in that if you want to learn English deeply, you need to not only think in English, but you need to feel the language. You need to retrain your brain so that you feel the language. So, what do I mean practically? It means that you not only understand the meaning of the words, but you feel the nuance，你能够明白背后的意思，你能够感觉到微妙的意思。So, for example, let's say your friend, your American friend, uh, is offering you a snack. He's eating potato chips. Okay, and then he offers it to another coworker, and you're sitting, I guess, in a lunchroom or something like that. And then the coworker says, "No, I'm okay. I'm okay." The words "I am okay." Okay. You First of all, you should understand that the meaning of what she's saying is she says, "No, thank you." Okay, no, thank you. But you should feel her response as trying to say, okay, well, I don't really need it right now. She's trying to be polite. She's trying to gently say no. 有一点像不要了，谢谢. Okay. So you should feel the meaning of what she's trying to say. She's trying to lightly say no in a gentle way. But maybe next time it's not because she doesn't like chips, but maybe in that moment she doesn't want to have any. Okay. So those are the nuances in the language, and to feel English in every aspect. So that's what it means to feel the language when you're listening. In the same way, when you are speaking English, to feel the language means that you convey your personality. I mean, you do it normally in Mandarin all the time, right? With your friends in Mandarin, your coworkers, classmates, your family members. When you speak in Mandarin, you're just expressing your personality naturally. It's all the unique aspects of your personality, maybe your humor, or maybe you're a little bit 内向, a little bit introverted, or 外向, extroverted. Whichever it is, you're expressing your personality. I want to give you an example. So I was talking to my student who is in high school, and I was sharing with her about one of my experiences. I think it was when it was earlier on when I came to Canada, and I was bullied because I was Chinese. Back then, there were, I guess, greater experiences of racism, unfortunately, back when I was younger, when I was a kid. And I was telling her how I stood up for myself, and I started to stand up for and defend not only myself but other kids that were bullied by those same people. And then my student said this. She said, "Handsome." She said, "Handsome." Okay, now I knew she was trying to say shy, right? Except in English, because this is an English. I'm teaching her English. It's an English class, and she was right in engaging emotionally in my story when I was telling her my story. This is actually one of the strategies in deep learning. And so I simply encourage her to take that feeling and use a different word that we normally use in English to express the same kind of feeling. Kind of like, for example, you might say sweet or cool or awesome, or some of the younger people here, I think they say lit, even though I'm a little bit too old to understand or use that word. I think it's LITE, lit. Okay, so to use a different word, so not handsome, because handsome means you're good looking. That's basically all that it means. It means you're good looking, and actually, very few people use the word handsome today in English. They might just say good looking or hot or something like that. And so, my suggestion for you when you are speaking English is to just let yourself express yourself. I know that one of the biggest barriers in language learning is your fear. 你感觉到比较尴尬，一点儿惧怕. Okay, so a little bit reserved. You're a little bit embarrassed you're afraid of making mistakes in English. And I really want to encourage you to not think so much about how people will respond or whether it's embarrassing, but just let yourself interact. Speak what's on your heart, on your mind in English. Try to think in English and just speak and be spontaneous. Respond the way you would when you're speaking Chinese. And I know that you're going to make a lot of mistakes, but I want to encourage you that this is the way to learn. This is the way that you retrain your brain to feel the language. You have to say what's immediately on your mind. And then later on, someone might correct you. That's okay. Or afterwards, you might correct yourself. That's okay too. And then later on, you get better and better at it. But then at least you have a feel for the language. So, deep learning means that you have so internalized English to the degree that you think in English and you feel and experience life in English. If you can achieve this, you will be able to do well both in your academic and vocational goals, your professional goals, and you will have a true and firm grasp of the English language.